Clickbait. It's everywhere. From the political circus to Florida man-level criminal stupidity, we all fall victim multiple times a day. And it comes at a cost. We're not reading a story about a community functioning normally or someone quietly doing a good job. It has to be something bizarre, chaotic, or shocking. A freak accident or the latest on the government cover-up of military UFO encounters. Who doesn't love a good spectacle? I know I do just about as much as anyone out there. But does easy access to all those crazy stories lower our motivation to do the actual, everyday work of living a good life? That was something Confucius worried about 2,500 years ago. He saw people speculating about the supernatural, marveling at feats of brute strength, and gossiping about political chaos. And his response was incredibly simple. He refused to discuss those topics with anyone who wanted to learn from him. Today we're looking at why he decided to starve the ancient equivalent of clickbait of its oxygen, and what we might be able to learn from trying to do the same in our own lives. Exploring the Analects, Episode 19, Passage 17.21, Bronze Age Clickbait. Hey folks, this is Elliot Bernstein. Thanks for joining me for episode 19 of Exploring the Analects. In this episode, we'll be covering passage 7.21 of the Analects, a 7-character phrase focused on 4 topics Confucius refused to discuss. As always, I'll read the passage in Chinese and English, explain the ideas behind it and provide some historical context, and then analyze the language found in the passage as a way to learn new words and phrases in classical Chinese and modern Mandarin. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button. No matter how you follow, I always appreciate a like or share. Or maybe you know someone who'd enjoy the show, so don't forget to tell them about it next time you talk. As always, you can follow along with the episode guide on analects.net, where you'll find all the Chinese terms in the episode, as well as a newly revamped full text of the Analects. If you have any questions or comments, reach out to me at elliot@analects.net. All right, let's get started. I'll read the passage in a modern Mandarin pronunciation, followed by my English translation. 7.21 子不语怪力乱神 The master did not discuss strange occurrences, feats of strength, rebellion, and spirits. This episode is a fast follow-on to the last one, considering the passages are so similar in structure. Let's hop back in with a quick refresher on a few points we discussed last time. First, keep in mind that the Analects is a book compiled by the disciples of Confucius. These were people who strongly believed that he should serve as a role model for others. In the last episode, we looked at a list of topics that Confucius approached with shen, or heedfulness. So including the list in the Analects suggests that his disciples felt their contemporaries didn't act heedfully regarding certain topics, and that doing so contributed to the disorder and fragmentation of 6th century BCE China. We'll see the same thing here. This is a list of topics that Confucius avoided discussing, and likely for the same reasons. He wanted to encourage others to value harmony and stability, rather than focusing on the extreme and the extraordinary. Returning to that list of what topics Confucius approached heedfully, They were ritual cleansing, warfare, and illness. We saw a thread run through these 3 topics. In each case, getting things wrong can have disastrous results. We also saw an expansion in scope of impact from narrow to broad, where illness affects the individual, warfare impacts whole communities, and ritual or sacrifice concerns not just the living, but even the dead. And again, we'll similarly find that a thread runs through these 4 topics. Each one is abnormal in a way that causes real distraction, and scope of impact broadens as well. From a curiously shaped rock that catches your eye during a stroll to a full-scale royal court sacrifice, each one grabs the attention of a larger group of people, taking them away from their everyday lives and concerns. With that covered, let's dig in and check out the language of this passage. Our first stop will be 不语, or as I translated above, did not discuss. If you're a student of modern Mandarin, you may wonder why this 语 means discuss and not speak. We actually covered this in episode 7 as well. The passage in question was 10.10. 食不语, 寝不言. When eating, he would not converse. When lying in bed, he would not talk. That phrase contrasts 2 characters, yu and yan. When they're combined in modern Mandarin, yu yan means language. But when taken alone, yan is the simple physical act of speaking, literally saying words, while yu means speaking to or with someone. In other words, having a conversation. Contrasting yu with yan here is important because it's unlikely this passage is telling us that Confucius literally would not talk about these subjects. Other passages in the Analects quote him on these subjects, so he didn't hold some superstitious belief or have a phobia that stopped him from uttering the words. The point here is that he didn't feel it was worth his time to lecture, debate, or otherwise deeply explore these subjects in conversation. The reason is what I mentioned above. Strange occurrences, feats of strength, rebellions, and spirits aren't everyday concerns. They're exceptions to the rule, distractions, and spectacles. In Confucius's opinion, they did nothing to teach people about how to live a good life. And to the contrary, they might even teach people to see problematic phenomena in a positive light. Now let's take a closer look at what each of these 4 categories are, starting with guai, or what I've translated above as strange occurrences. This is a single character, so to add occurrences to the passage is a bit of editorializing. It's pretty ambiguous if we just say he didn't want to talk about the strange or strange things. It's likely this included events and things themselves. Maybe there's a double-headed chicken someone keeps as a pet 1 village over. That's a strange thing. Or maybe a crack opened up in the earth and smoking black tar poured out and exploded when it reached the community kitchen. That's a strange event. In either case, those are distractions that nobody stands a chance of making sense of, especially not in 6th century BCE China. So trying to do so mostly just distracts people from their actual responsibilities. Next is li, or feats of strength. Just like guai, this is a single character, so again, there's editorializing. Li just means power, force, or strength. What can you do with this? Does it refer to people who are extraordinarily strong, or is it about valuing physical strength as a virtue? Maybe it just means using force to accomplish things or resolve disagreements. Again, we don't exactly know, but like with guai, we can guess that li is the exception, not the rule. People who are particularly weak or particularly strong fall into an extreme point on the spectrum of strength. What they can accomplish doesn't represent what most people can accomplish. So Confucius would not see them as role models who could serve as an appropriate example of how to use one's strength. Confucius was also opposed to a might makes right approach to problem solving, and was instead a proponent of leading people to the right answers through examples of correct behavior. 12.22 reads, "By holding the upright against the crooked, one can make the crooked upright." In other words, instead of using force to correct what's wrong, use what is already correct, like training a tree to grow upright by lashing it to a stake. After Li comes Luan. At its most general, Luan just means disorder or chaos. Most commentators and translators take it to refer to political disorder, specifically events like rebellions and assassinations. The same logic applies to Luan as applies to the previous two categories. Rebellions and assassinations are spectacles. They capture the imagination, grab people's attention, and make people talk. Stability, order, good governance, those tend not to make people talk, but at the same time, they're what people need to thrive. It's something like the reason why parents don't want their kids to play violent games. They're worried that seeing violence desensitizes us to it, or may even lead us to glorify it. But anyone who's experienced the horrors of war can probably tell you it's not really entertainment material. Confucius would probably want us playing world builder video games instead. Last up is Shen, or spirits. What's wrong with having a little chat about the paranormal? You're not going to be surprised at this point. It has nothing to do with everyday life. Speculate all you like, but when was the last time people could definitively agree on anything about ghosts, spirits, or the gods? This isn't to say that Confucius wanted people to ignore the spiritual realm. It was actually the opposite. He believed it was of paramount importance that everyone from kings to peasants paid their respect to the ancestors and the heavens through rites and sacrifices. But going down the rabbit hole to the point that you lose focus on the world around you, that's something easy for people to do when it comes to the spiritual world. And he thought it was much better for us to be firmly planted on earth. Remember the passage I quoted last episode, 11.12. Confucius's disciple, Zilu, asked how to serve the spirits, to which Confucius responded, "If you can't yet serve the people, how can you serve the spirits? If you don't yet understand life, how can you understand death?" Now that we're finished with the explanation of the passage, I'll take a few minutes to discuss a really fascinating aspect of historical Confucian scholarship, and that's the traditional belief that Confucius was the author or main editor of a book called the Chunqiu, or the Spring and Autumn Annals. Modern scholarship rejects this claim, and as far as I know, there's no archaeological evidence that's been found supporting his authorship or involvement in the work. But from at least the time of Mencius in the 4th century BCE until the early 20th century, the claim was made again and again by Confucian scholars. The Chunqiu was a historical chronicle from Confucius's home state of Lu. It records political, military, and natural events in the state and in neighboring states for a period of about 250 years that ended around the same time of Confucius's death. The text itself is very terse and consists of short statements recording events and the dates on which they occurred. These statements are so brief that several commentaries were written to explain them, and a couple such commentaries are held in much higher literary regard than the original text itself. The Spring and Autumn period was a turbulent time in China, so the Chunqiu is full of ominous portents, bloody rebellions, and assassination attempts. Considering that fact, you might already be able to see a bit of a disconnect between the statement in passage 7.21 and the claim that Confucius authored or edited the Chunqiu. Why would Confucius author a book full of such chaotic and extraordinary events if he didn't want to discuss them? That was a question traditional commentators wrestled with, and I find it very interesting how they twisted themselves in knots trying to handle the cognitive dissonance. We don't know exactly where the claim about Confucius's authorship started, but its most famous appearance is in the Mencius. That was already at least third or fourth hand information if we accept the claim that Mencius was a student of Confucius's grandson, Zisi. But the work of Mencius was revered by Confucian scholars and second only to the Analects itself, so few were willing to question the accuracy of the statements in it. By the time those famous commentaries I mentioned were being formally recorded, around the 3rd century BCE, they were trying to cram the Annals into the framework of the Analects. One such commentary, the Gongyang Zhuan, popularized the concept of 微言大义, or colloquially, small words with big meanings. The idea was that, yes, Confucius wrote about assassinations, rebellions, and freak natural disasters, but the words he chose encoded judgments about those events. For example, one of two different words could be used to describe when one state's leader killed another state's leader. Ke meant to kill, and bai meant to defeat. According to this small words with big meaning thinking, when Confucius wanted to express that the attack was righteous and justified, he would write bai. But when he wanted to condemn it, he would use ke. Of course, regardless of who wrote the Chunqiu, we just don't know if these are judgments or the stylistic choices of different authors, or simply descriptive of what happened. In any case, you can see how the belief that they were morally charged statements was a way to explain how someone who didn't want to discuss chaos only did so in order to leave judgments for future generations. Later thinkers from the 1st century BCE, such as Dong Zhongshu, through to Zhu Xi in the 12th century, ran with this small words with big meaning type thinking, and other theories to explain the Chunqiu as judgments instead of simple historical record keeping. The Chunqiu records many natural events, eclipses, earthquakes, plagues and blights, and so forth. This raised the same question as the records of rebellions and assassinations. Why would Confucius record them if he didn't want to discuss strange occurrences? Well, of course it was because he wanted to leave judgments for future generations. So they interpreted these events as expressions of Tianming, or the mandate of heaven. When a ruler acted immorally, causing death and suffering among the people, this went against the mandate of heaven. And you know what happens when you make heaven angry. Natural disasters. But the fact was that Confucius, as presented in the Analects, never draws a connection between the mandate of heaven and natural disasters. So the way I see it, these were later thinkers projecting common ideas about how heaven rewards and punishes rulers based on the morality of their conduct onto Confucius's own thinking, in addition to onto the Chunqiu. I'll wrap up this section with the end of passage 17.19. I think it does a good job of reflecting the attitude of Confucius as we see him in the Analects, that spending a lot of time trying to understand and interpret the events of the spiritual world just distracts us from all the things needing our attention in the world around us. 天何言哉？四时行焉，百物生焉。天何言哉? Does heaven say anything at all? Yet the 4 seasons arise from it, and the myriad of life is born from it. But does heaven ever say anything? Let's move on to our language-focused section. Even though I touched on most of the characters in this passage in the previous sections, I'll go over each one again with some related words. 子, as you know, refers to the master, Confucius. 不语 literally means to not converse or not discuss. 语 here is contrasted with yan, which is more straightforwardly speaking. For example, in passage 6.21, 中人以上，可以与上也. Lofty matters can be discussed with those above average. Next up is 怪, strange or unusual. This character literally appears only once in the entire text of the Analects. So to get a deeper read on it, in the classical context, we'd need to look elsewhere. But in the modern context, we have words like 怪物, monster, and 怪癖, quirk, both very much relating and retaining the meaning of something strange. 力, strength, power, or force. In passage 14.33, we see 力 contrasted with 德. 既不称其力，称其德也. A prized horse is not valued for its power. It is valued for its excellence. This goes back to the point in our earlier discussion. This is physical force as opposed to moral force. 乱, disorder or chaos. This character is used throughout the Analects to refer to various types of disorder, from disorganized music to disorderly personal conduct to insurrections and rebellions. The character retains this general sense when used in modern Mandarin, both on its own or in a pair, such as the word 乱套, a messy situation. And then finally, 神, spirits or gods. This character refers not just to spirits, but to the spiritual realm and more powerful spiritual forces in general. We can contrast this character with 鬼 or ghost, which refers to more common types of souls, such as those of the deceased or those still present on earth. But since Confucius refused to delve deep into these subjects, they often appear together or apparently interchangeably in the Analects. There's one final note about how to read this passage. As you may be aware, classical Chinese contains no punctuation, so we can't be sure if this is 4 categories or 2. According to some commentators, the passage is discussing 怪力, unusual strength, and 乱神, troublemaking spirits. Honestly, it doesn't seem to make much difference to me. Even if it's those 2 instead of the 4 we discussed, those are all still extraordinary things that Confucius wouldn't have liked to spend time discussing. All right, folks, that's it for this episode. Don't forget to check out the episode guide on analects.net and visit YouTube to subscribe and like the video edition. Join me next time for a discussion of passage 13.7, where we'll delve into the history of the Spring and Autumn period states of Lu and Wei. See you there.